The fluorescent lights in the conference room flickered erratically, as if they were having a panic attack in sync with the chaos unfolding across the floor below. The disjointed flashes cast a nervous energy across the room, like some invisible alarm was warning everyone of an inevitable explosion. Seated by the window, Bryce Hamilton adjusted his silk tie for the third time in under 10 minutes. Sweat began to soak through the fine fabric, while his face turned a deeper shade of red with each passing second, not from heat, but from humiliation and helplessness. In front of him, an enormous wall of red error messages scrolled endlessly on the oversized screen, blinking like an electronic taunt. These weren't just technical glitches. They were a public indictment. A system's failure at this scale under his watch was more than inconvenient, it was career-ending. A tech company CEO unable to manage his own operations? That wasn't just failure, that was disgrace. "This is unacceptable." Bryce slammed his palm down on the polished mahogany conference table, the impact jolting several coffee cups into the air like startled soldiers reacting to a sudden bomb blast. "We're hemorrhaging $12,000 every single hour because this damned system won't stay up." The room froze instantly. Even the most seasoned engineers looked like deer caught in high beams. No one moved. Sarah from IT fiddled nervously with a clicking pen, the sharp sound now echoing like a countdown. Marcus, the lead developer, kept refreshing his screen with a kind of blind desperation, as though hitting F5 could magically resolve the chaos. Even Tom from QA, normally the room's resident cynic, sat in silence, lips pressed tight, hands clenched until his knuckles turned white. At the far end of the room, nearly blending into the shadowy wall behind him, sat a quiet, unassuming man in a faded khaki jacket. He looked more like a file clerk than someone with any real purpose here. Gary Mitchell. Most had forgotten he was even in the room. Just another consultant, they'd been told, sent to assess workflow efficiency, whatever that meant. He scribbled the occasional note on a plain notepad, glancing around with a passive air like he was counting ceiling tiles. But Gary wasn't tracking workflow. He was studying people, watching how they treated one another when they thought no one who mattered was paying attention. For the past 3 weeks, he had quietly collected not just data, but truth. And today, that truth was stepping out from behind the curtain, like the final act of a play that had been building toward this very moment. "Our client presentation is tomorrow morning," Bryce shouted again, pacing like a trapped animal. "And our production environment is being held together by duct tape and prayer." "Sir," Sarah spoke softly, her voice trembling like a wire under tension. "We've tried everything. The issue seems buried deep inside legacy code from almost a decade ago. Trying to find it is like—" "I don't want to hear about needles or haystacks," Bryce snapped, cutting her off. "I want solutions. We're supposed to be the top tech firm in the state, and we can't even keep our own system from imploding." At that moment, the heavy conference room door creaked open with a sound so faint it might have gone unnoticed. Except in a room wound this tight, every disruption echoed like a siren. All heads turned. Standing in the doorway was a young woman, maybe 19, with long brown hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She wore a faded denim jacket over a plain white t-shirt and carried a worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked like someone who belonged in a library or a campus quad, not a corporate war room. Lena Rodriguez didn't need to be loud or flashy to be seen. There was something in her eyes, a quiet, analytical sharpness, that hinted at a mind that never stopped observing. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize there was a meeting," she said softly, already backing out, her gaze politely lowered. "I was just looking for my dad. I finished my homework early and wanted to let him know." Bryce's expression shifted, the frustration on his face morphing into something uglier, disdain. Then came the words, delivered like a slap. "Your dad? Who's your— Oh, right, you're Rodriguez's kid, the janitor's daughter." The way he said it made it sound like she was something trapped in on someone's shoe. A few people shifted uncomfortably, eyes averted. No one stood up. No one said anything. Gary stopped writing. For the first time in that meeting, he looked up. Really looked. What he saw in Lena was unexpected. A new variable. One that didn't fit the equation they thought they'd solved. "Yes, sir," Lena replied, still calm, though a flicker of hurt crossed her face. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I'll just go." "All done." Bryce's voice changed. Not angry now, but amused. The cruel kind of amusement that surfaces when someone realizes they've found a scapegoat. A diversion. A way to regain a sense of power. A smile curled on his lips, twisted and smug. "You know what? Maybe we've been overcomplicating things," he said, loud enough for the room. "Maybe what we need is a simpler perspective." Suddenly the entire room held its breath. Even the hum of the air conditioner, ever present and dull, seemed to retreat into silence. And now, all eyes were on Bryce Hamilton, whose next move wasn't about finding solutions. It was about reasserting dominance, not over the system, but over the people in the room, over the narrative, over her. "We're all college-educated professionals here, right?" he said, voice like silk stretched over barbed wire. "Graduates of prestigious schools with expensive degrees, yet not one of us can fix a single glitch." He turned toward Lena, still frozen in the doorway. "Maybe what we need is someone less complicated." At the back of the room, Gary's grip on his pen tightened. He'd seen this before. The exact moment when someone's mask of professionalism slipped, revealing the rot underneath. "What are you getting at?" Marcus asked, wary. Bryce raised his hand and pointed toward Lena, the young woman still standing silently in the doorway, her eyes blinking rapidly as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Why don't we let this sweet girl give it a shot?" he said, with a half-smile laced in condescension. "I bet she's great with computers. All kids are these days, right?" A few awkward chuckles broke the silence, short, scattered, and far too weak to mask the discomfort in the room. Sarah dropped her gaze, her shoulders subtly trembling from embarrassment. Tom, usually quick with a sarcastic remark, could only stare down at the tips of his shoes. "Well, what do you say, kid?" Bryce continued, his voice so thick with mockery it could have been bottled and sold as concentrated arrogance. "You think you can fix the thing that all the smart people in this room couldn't?" Lena's cheeks flushed pink, but when she spoke, her voice was remarkably calm, unshaken. I don't think I should." "Oh, but I insist," Bryce said, clapping his hands together theatrically as if he'd just solved the global energy crisis. "Really, I dare you. If you can fix it, I promise you'll get full credit. Heck, maybe we'll even put in a good word for you at the local community college." More uneasy laughter followed, not because it was funny, but because no one knew what else to do in the face of such blatant cruelty. To Gary, the scene was more than just inappropriate, it was deeply troubling. He wasn't just witnessing grown adults complicit in the humiliation of a teenager who had done nothing wrong. He was witnessing something worse. They didn't even realize what they were doing, or worse, they didn't care. Lena didn't run. She didn't stammer an apology. She didn't let the shame swallow her whole like so many others might have. Instead, she took a small step forward. Just one step, but one that shifted the entire room. "What kind of error is it?" she asked softly, almost a whisper. The laughter cut off abruptly. "What did you say?" Bryce blinked, thrown off. "It's the system error," Lena clarified, her voice gaining strength. "Is it data corruption, a network timeout, or a memory leak? Is it isolated to one subsystem, or is it affecting multiple?" Gary leaned forward, now genuinely intrigued. This was unexpected. No one, least of all Bryce, had anticipated this. It's, Bryce stumbled, suddenly caught in his own trap. It's a cascading failure in the production environment. Multiple subsystems affected. Very complicated. When did it start? Lena asked. 3 weeks ago, Sarah answered instinctively, then looked around nervously, realizing she had just participated. Is it intermittent? Lena nodded to herself. Have you checked to see if it coincides with any maintenance windows or third-party API changes? The room turned so still it felt like the oxygen had been drained. Gary set his pen down, entirely focused. Excuse me? Bryce asked, no longer sarcastic, just confused. If the issue is inconsistent but progressively worse, Lena continued, it could be a resource leak, accumulating over time, or maybe it's tied to changes from a vendor's API. Has anyone reviewed the system logs from the first incident? Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. Tom actually looked up from his shoes. How do you know all this? Sarah nearly asked out loud, but caught herself just in time. Bryce, now cycling through every shade of red, began to realize things were spiraling far beyond the harmless little joke he had envisioned. His petty game meant to reassert dominance by making someone else feel small was being turned on its head by the very girl he'd underestimated. That's enough, Bryce barked, desperate to regain control. I think we've had our fun. Run along now and find your father, sweetheart. The adults need to get back to work. But Lena didn't budge. Something in her had shifted. The embarrassment lingered, yes, but it had been overtaken by something deeper, steadier. You dared me, she said quietly but firmly. You said it in front of everyone. She looked around the room, meeting every set of eyes one by one. When her gaze met Gary's, he didn't just see confidence. He saw courage, the real kind. I accept, she said, turning back to Bryce. I accept your dare, Mr. Hamilton. I'd like to try fixing your system error. The silence that followed was so deep Gary could hear his own heartbeat. In over 2 decades working in corporate America, he had seen all kinds of meetings, power struggles, ego battles, boardroom posturing, but nothing like this. A 19-year-old girl, a janitor's daughter, standing in a room full of engineers and executives and calling out a senior manager on his home turf. Fine, Bryce growled through clenched teeth. Fine, but when you fail, and you will fail, I don't want to hear a single excuse. Nothing about it being too hard or too complex. Got it? Got it, Lena said simply, without flinching. As she turned and stepped out of the room, Gary opened his notebook and wrote a single line. This time, it wasn't about workflow charts or corporate culture. Drac L. Rodriguez. Because from that moment on, the game had changed. And no one in that room, not even Gary himself, had any idea what was coming next. 3 hours later, the office was nearly deserted. Only the cleaning crew remained, along with the soft whir of vacuum cleaners echoing through the halls. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor outside conference room B, her laptop resting on her knees, connected to the guest Wi-Fi. The screen in front of her hadn't changed in over 20 minutes, but her mind was far from idle. She had drifted back to a memory 2 years ago, a quiet evening in her father's modest apartment, the rhythmic clicking of a keyboard, the warmth of a lesson disguised as conversation. Programming isn't just about writing code, her father had said, fingers dancing gracefully over the keys. It's about understanding how a system thinks. And sometimes the most elegant solution is the one nobody sees coming. Arthur Donovan, the soft-spoken, silver-hailed man who visited her father during night shifts, had entered her life completely by chance. For 3 years, he'd shown up like a quiet ritual, always with thick technical books she once assumed were written in some alien language. Back then, she was just 17, still wrestling with basic algebra, convinced computers were cold, unreachable things meant for someone else. You want to learn? he'd asked one evening, surprised but warm. Most kids your age think coding is boring. I don't know if I want to learn, she had confessed. I see the way your face lights up when you're working. It's like you're solving puzzles, and I love puzzles. And that was the beginning. What Arthur never told her, what she still didn't know, was that those puzzles he used to walk her through were in fact the very architectural blueprints powering the building she now sat in. The same infrastructure that Bryce Hamilton claimed to understand. The same code that was now crashing all around them. Arthur Donovan had been Pinnacle Tech's lead systems architect for 15 years, a quiet genius who had laid the foundation for over 90% of the company's operations. But after a minor heart attack and a quiet, forced retirement, he'd faded from the picture, discarded like yesterday's news. No one remembered the man who built their digital world. No one, except Miguel Rodriguez, Lena's father, a janitor who had, by some cosmic coincidence, become friends with the retired engineer during his nightly shifts. A friendship no one would have expected, between a man with calloused hands and another with calloused ideas. But that friendship had planted a seed, and now it was beginning to grow. Legacy systems, Arthur once explained, are like old houses. People keep adding rooms, repainting the walls, but no one ever bothers to check the original blueprint. That's where the real problems are hiding. Now, Lena was staring at the system log Sarah had reluctantly granted her access to. The error pattern wasn't random. It had rhythm, like a heartbeat beating out of sync. She pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, and tapped on the only name that mattered. I know it's late, but I need your help. Do you remember what you said about cascading errors? His reply came in under 2 minutes. I'm still, playing with model ships. What kind of cascade are we talking about? For the next hour, Lena described everything she'd seen. Arthur didn't offer answers. That wasn't his style. Instead, he asked sharp, focused questions that nudged her thinking in the right direction. If it's intermittent and getting worse, what do you check first? Resource leaks. Good. And if it's not RAM or CPU? Network connections, database, file handles. Excellent. But what if the issue isn't in our own code? That question froze her. All this time, Lena had assumed the problem was internal to Pinnacle's system. But what if it wasn't? Arthur, what if someone planted something in the system that shouldn't be there? Her phone rang immediately. Arthur's voice was on the line, calmer than usual but serious. Lena, what exactly are you looking at? She told him. About the strange IPs that didn't match any of the company's addresses, about the odd database queries, about the weird overlap between the bandwidth spikes and system crashes. Mia, Arthur said after a pause, you need to be extremely careful. What you're seeing, it looks like someone is siphoning data from your company's system. Or worse, they could be running an entire shadow infrastructure using Pinnacle's network. It's parasitic, sophisticated, and illegal. Lena swallowed hard. This wasn't a bug anymore. It was a scheme. Arthur, my manager challenged me to fix the system. He said a vendor was working on it. And what if he already knew? Arthur cut in. Lena, listen to me. Document everything, but don't patch anything yet, and absolutely don't tell anyone. But I accepted the challenge. You accepted when they expected you to fail, Arthur said gently. That's your advantage. Don't waste it. The call ended. Lena sat alone in the dim hallway, heart heavy. Arthur had once taught her that the most important skill in programming wasn't writing code. It was recognizing patterns. And the pattern she saw now wasn't made by machines. It was made by human greed. For the next 2 hours, Lena meticulously documented every unauthorized connection, every suspicious query, every foreign IP address. All of it pointed to one thing. Someone was exploiting Pinnacle Tech's infrastructure to run an illicit operation, and the technical errors were nothing more than a smokescreen to hide the resource drain. By 3 a.m., when her father came rolling his janitor's cart down the hallway, Lena was finished. "You're still here, mija?" Miguel asked, surprised. "I'm working on a little project, Papa," she smiled, closing her laptop. "And? I think I just cracked it." What she didn't say was that the solution she'd found would change everything. Not just for her, not just for the company, but especially for the man who had underestimated her. The next morning, the air in Pinnacle Tech's main lobby was tight with tension, like the stillness before a storm. Lena walked in at 7:30, the USB in her coat pocket feeling 10 times heavier than it should. She hadn't really slept, her brain replaying every discovery on a loop, terrified she'd missed something. The IT help desk was manned by Kevin, the guy in his 20s who usually acted like she didn't exist. Today, when he saw Lena walking up, he looked genuinely surprised. But exercises help people reveal an anxious agenda. The list of helpful habits that people are aiming for, a very long, in prompt reading, would as well be. Deeply helpful, encouraging, deliberate, anxious, etc. When a cosplayer always sets their agenda. He stopped mid-sentence, realizing the end of that thought wouldn't sound great. "Yes," Lena said plainly. "I found the issue, and I have a solution." Kevin raised an eyebrow, barely hiding his skepticism. Lena handed him a folder and the USB. "Everything's documented. Once you understand the root cause, the fix is actually pretty simple." "But Kevin," she leaned in, "I think you should escalate this. This isn't just a small bug." Before Kevin could respond, Lena turned and walked away. She had class, and she'd kept her word. She didn't see Kevin open the file, his expression morphing from curiosity to shock to alarm. She didn't see him immediately contact his supervisor, and she definitely didn't know that just 15 minutes later, Gary Mitchell showed up in the IT room, having quietly tracked all system activity since the meeting the day before. But 3 hours later, as Lena passed the server room on her way to the cafeteria, she heard the buzz of conversation from behind the glass door. "Away, the entire production environment just stabilized. Look at the performance graphs." Lena stopped, curiosity piqued. "It's like the system got flushed clean. The memory leaks are gone. The queries that were choking the CPU, gone. Even the network latencies back to baseline. The question is who did this. It's weird. The patch came through the standard channel, but the way it handles the error, it's brilliant. The person who wrote this didn't just patch a bug. They eliminated the root of the problem." Lena couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth. Arthur would be proud. But the smile vanished when she heard hurried footsteps behind her, then a familiar voice, cold and sharp, and say, "Well, look who it is. Our little computer genius." Bryce's Hamilton, face pale, eyes frantic. Behind him stood Richards from procurement and Stevens from operations, both looking like they wished they were anywhere else. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," Lena said, doing her best to stay calm. "I heard the system's running better today." "Better is putting it lightly." Bryce stepped closer. "It's running suspiciously well enough to raise some very interesting questions." "What kind of questions?" Lena asked. "Questions about vendor contracts, about who's authorized to touch what, about who's been doing what to our systems." His words were clipped and icy. Lena's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected her patch to draw this much attention. She thought, at best, someone might skim it and file it away in some forgotten folder. She wasn't prepared for the storm now heading her way, or for the look on Bryce Hamilton's face twisted with fear and fury. "I just fixed the error," Lena said carefully, each word like stepping onto cracking ice. "Like you dared me to." "You did a lot more than that, didn't you?" Bryce took another step forward, his voice dropping to a low, threatening whisper. "You started digging into places you had no business being. You uncovered things that were meant to stay buried forever." The entire hallway seemed to freeze. The sound of typing, ringing phones, and casual conversations all vanished, swallowed by the sudden stillness. "I documented everything in the report," Lena replied, her voice steady despite the tension. "All the unauthorized traffic, the off-network IP addresses, the resource-draining operations disguised as technical glitches." "Shut your mouth," Bryce roared, eyes burning with fury. "You have no idea what you've just started." Actually, a calm, firm voice rang out from behind them. "I think she knows exactly what she's doing." Everyone turned. Gary Mitchell, or rather, someone entirely different, was striding toward them. No longer the quiet observer in a worn khaki jacket, he walked with commanding authority, each step radiating clarity and control, as if the very air around him was falling into order. "Gary," Bryce stammered. The rage in his face faded into confusion. "This has nothing to do with you." "Oh, but it has everything to do with me, Mr. Hamilton," Gary said evenly. He came to stand beside Lena. His presence made her feel shielded, as if a silent wall had risen between her and the chaos. "I've been conducting a comprehensive audit of this company for the past month," he announced, eyes locked on Bryce. "And what Miss Rodriguez has uncovered is immensely valuable." Richards and Stevens, Bryce's two shadowy allies, looked as if all the blood had drained from their faces. Bryce, once flushed with power, was now pale and visibly shaking. I don't understand," Lena murmured. Gary turned to her, his gaze softening, no longer that of a detached consultant but of an ally. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said gently, "I believe it's time for a proper introduction. My name is not Gary Mitchell. I'm Gary Langford, the CEO of Pinnacle Tech." The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed, no one blinked. "And thanks to your work," Gary continued, "we now have sufficient evidence to prove that Mr. Bryce Hamilton has been operating an illegal scheme within this company, through a shell corporation he created to siphon company bandwidth and processing power for his personal business." Bryce looked as if the ground beneath him had given way, and in a sense, it had. His carefully constructed empire was collapsing. Brick. "The only question now," Gary added, his voice still calm but sharpened like steel, "is how we move forward from this." 30 minutes later, an emergency meeting was underway in the executive boardroom. News of the scandal had spread like wildfire through the company. The hallways buzzed with whispers, astonishment, and an undercurrent of fear. Lena sat at the long conference table, feeling like she'd stepped into a dream no one ever dared to imagine. On her left sat Gary, no, CEO Langford, flipping through files with quiet resolve. On her right was Bryce, no longer a snarling predator, but a condemned man awaiting judgment. The room was packed with department heads, HR representatives, and the legal team. Eyes darted toward Lena, the 19-year-old who had suddenly become the focal point of the company's biggest scandal. "Before we begin," Gary said, closing a thick file with a soft but decisive thud that echoed like a judge's gavel, "I want everyone in this room to understand something. For the past month, I've been quietly evaluating not just our systems, but our people." Sarah from IT visibly blanched, clearly recalling all the candid complaints she had shared with the consultant. "I've been watching how employees treat each other, how managers make decisions, how we measure a person's worth based on status, background, or education." He opened a thick notebook and flipped through it deliberately. March 15th, observed Mr. Hamilton berating a staff member for asking for clarification. March 18th, documented discriminatory behavior toward janitorial staff. March 22nd, recorded disparaging remarks about an employee's family and education. A heavy silence fell over the room. Some managers lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze. But yesterday, Gurry continued, lifting his head, something extraordinary happened. In the middle of a crisis meeting, instead of leading a solution, Mr. Hamilton chose to humiliate a young woman. The only thing she was guilty of was walking into the wrong room. Lena felt her cheeks flush. Once again, all eyes turned to her. But this time they weren't eyes of pity. They were eyes of admiration. What Mr. Hamilton didn't know, Gary said, lifting a second folder, is that I've been tracking system anomalies for 3 weeks, and I've had suspicions for quite some time. He spread printed logs across the table, pointing to specific entries. Data redirections, bandwidth siphoning, database queries occurring at strange hours, none of it aligned with any official company projects. We brought in an external cybersecurity firm, and they discovered this. He pushed a folder to the center of the table. In Quantum Solutions, LLC, a bogus consulting company that exists only on paper. No office, no staff, no website. Yet our company paid it hundreds of thousands of dollars for services that never existed. Bryce was now ashen, devoid of color. The most damning part, Gary said coldly. Ms. Rodriguez mapped out the entire exploit path. Every IP, every database hook, every stolen processing cycle, all of it, pointed back to one source. Mr. Hamilton. And most importantly, Gary added, his voice slow and sharp, the registered owner of Quantum Solutions matches the home address, social security number, and bank account of Mr. Bryce Hamilton. Bryce bowed his head. You don't understand. I was under pressure, budget cuts. I was just trying to generate additional revenue. For yourself, Gary snapped. We have your full financial records. The room erupted in a storm of murmurs. Legal counsel started taking notes. HR exchanged determined glances. And the remarkable part, Gary pressed on, is that the person who exposed all of this wasn't even an employee. She was the one mocked in this very room, the one who used her time, her skill, and her integrity to do what no one else here had the courage or clarity to do. He looked around, his eyes cold and deliberate. This raises a crucial question. How do we really judge people, and what kind of company do we want to be? He shut his notebook. Mr. Hamilton, you are hereby terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Legal will follow up with criminal proceedings. As Bryce was led away, his reputation and career crumbling behind him, Gary turned to Lena. And now, Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like a word with you. The company-wide announcement came at 2:00 p.m., delivered personally by Gary in the main auditorium. Lena sat in the back row, her heart still reeling from everything that had happened in a single morning. Around her, more than 300 employees whispered to one another, eyes full of tension, wonder, and disbelief. Some of you may have heard the rumors, Gary began, his voice steady as it carried through the microphone. Today, I'm here to talk about the truth. What followed was a thorough yet carefully worded presentation of the entire investigation, the fraud discovery, and the immediate termination of not only Bryce Hamilton, but also 2 procurement managers who had knowingly participated. Gary never mentioned Lena by name, but she could feel dozens of eyes turning toward her when he emphasized that it was a perspective from outside the system that had helped uncover the full extent of the wrongdoing. The financial damage is significant, Gary continued, his voice calm and measured. We estimate that over $400,000, 0 cents worth of company resources were illegally directed. We are currently pursuing legal action, and will do everything in our power to recover those funds." A hand went up in the engineering section. "Sir, how do we know there aren't other cases like this still happening?" "An excellent question," Gary nodded. "And that's precisely why I began this audit in the first place." He went on to outline the changes being implemented immediately: stricter internal controls, regular security audits, and, most importantly, a comprehensive review of the company's hiring and promotion policies. After the meeting, Lena tried to slip out quietly toward the back, but Gary's voice stopped her just before she touched the door. "Mrs. Rodriguez, would you please come to my office for a moment?" 20 minutes later, Lena sat in the top-floor executive office, a space that had once felt as distant as the moon to a community college student working 2 part-time jobs and living with her father to save on expenses. Gary was reviewing her academic records on his screen. 3.8 GPA in foundational computer science, he read aloud. Part-time enrollment, self-funded education, living at home to reduce costs. He looked up. "What's your long-term plan?" Lena sat up straight, answering cautiously. "I want to finish my associate's degree first, then, if I can afford it, transfer to a 4-year university. Computer science or software engineering, depending on finances." "And what inspired you to choose this field?" he asked. Lena hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "I had a mentor once. He showed me that programming isn't just about writing code. It's about how you approach a problem. It's learning to think in systems, to spot patterns others overlook." "Was this mentor a teacher at your school?" "No, sir." Lena took a steady breath. "His name is Arthur Donovan. He used to visit my dad during his night shift, and one day he offered to teach me programming, as a hobby." That answer genuinely surprised Gary. "Arthur Donovan, tall, gray beard, always carrying a stack of tech books?" "Yes. Do you know him?" Gary nodded, and for the first time his eyes sparkled with something close to reverence. "Arthur designed most of this company's system architecture. He was our chief systems architect for 15 years. A legend. He laid the foundation for almost everything we still use today." Lena felt her world tilt slightly. "He never told me he used to work here." "That sounds like him," Gary said with a smile, quiet. "Never one to brag. But now it makes sense why your analysis yesterday was so precise. You weren't guessing. You were trained by the man who built the very system you dissected." The door opened. Gary's assistant stepped in. "Sir, there's someone here insisting on speaking to you about the investigation. He says it's important." "Send him in." And then Arthur Donovan appeared. He looked just as Lena remembered. Steady hands weathered by time, kind eyes, and shoulders that seemed to carry a world of knowledge. "Arthur," Gary immediately stood up. "It's good to see you again." "Likewise, Gary," he nodded, then turned to Lena. "Mija, when your father told me what happened this morning, I came right away. Are you all right?" "I'm okay." Lena nodded. "But why didn't you ever tell me you worked here?" Arthur took a seat, his voice low and warm. "Because I wanted you to love learning for its own sake, not because you thought it might land you a good job someday." Gary looked to Arthur. "Do you know she uncovered the security breach?" "I suspected she'd find something interesting the moment I heard how she described the glitch," Arthur said with a quiet chuckle. "Didn't expect it to be fraud, though." "And we just discovered," Gary added, his tone more serious now, "that Hamilton started his financial creativity nearly 2 years ago." "And if Lena hadn't accepted that dare," Arthur asked, "then we'd still be in the dark," Gary admitted. "Or worse, it might have continued for years." Arthur turned to Lena, pride gleaming in his eyes. "I told you once," he said, "a good programmer sees what others miss." Gary paused, then continued. "I have a proposal, The company needs to restructure its security systems, and we need someone who understands not just the technology, but the... Arthur looked like he was about to decline, but Gary smiled and shook his head. Not you. Her. He turned to Lena. I'd like to offer you a full-ride scholarship to complete your degree, along with a paid internship on our security team. But you'll need a mentor, and I can't think of anyone better than him. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken. Sir, I don't know what to say. Trust say you'll think about it, Gary replied, because by tomorrow morning this story will be everywhere. Janitor's daughter exposes multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. You've earned the right to choose your own path now. 6 months later, Lena Rodriguez walked through the lobby of the company where she'd once felt invisible, but today everything was different. The security guard gave her a respectful nod. Co-workers smiled and greeted her with cheerful good mornings. The employee badge on her chest, System Security Intern, now carried not just responsibility, but pride. The front-page story had grown into a national sensation, spreading from local news to national tech blogs. 3 universities offered her full scholarships. 2 major tech firms invited her for internships. A cybersecurity conference asked her to give a keynote. But she chose to stay at Pinnacle Tech, working under Arthur's mentorship and continuing her studies through the company's educational partnership program. Morning going okay? Sarah called out from the help desk. As okay as it can be, Lena replied with a smile, even as her stomach twisted in knots. Today she was set to present her final report to the board of directors, a presentation now considered a model for fraud prevention in corporate environments. But before that, she had something personal to take care of. Her father was sitting in the break room, sipping coffee with Arthur, as he often did. Mije, Miguel greeted her with a familiar smile. How are you feeling today? Nervous, but the good kind of nervous, she replied. Have you decided about Stanford? Arthur asked quietly. The acceptance letter from Stanford, with a full scholarship, was sitting on her desk. Everyone assumed it was the dream, but walking away from Pinnacle Tech now felt like leaving something unfinished, something that truly mattered. And torn, Lena admitted. Part of me wants to go, but another part feels like there's still something important here, something real. Arthur nodded. Back in the day, I thought the most important thing was writing elegant code and optimizing algorithms. Took me decades to realize the most important thing is creating a place where people like you can grow. Gary appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt. The board's ready. Lena's presentation exceeded all expectations. She clearly laid out the original system flaws, the security measures now in place, and how the company's evolving culture was shaping its future. Ms. Rodriguez, the board chair asked, what are your long-term plans? Can this company keep someone like you? Gary smiled. Actually, that's what we're here to talk about today. We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Systems Security, effective upon your graduation. Competitive salary, full benefits, and your own budget to build your team. Lena was speechless, but Gary was. We're also launching the Donovan Rodriguez Initiative, designed to find and nurture young talent from all walks of life, and you'll be co-leading it. Arthur went silent, his eyes glassy with emotion. Named after both of us? He asked softly. Yes, Gary replied. You laid the foundation, and Lena showed us how to protect it. Lena looked around. The people who once felt like strangers now stood as teammates. She looked at Gary, the one who gave her a chance, and then Arthur, the man who believed in her before she believed in herself. But what about Stanford? She whispered. Stanford will always be there, Gary said, but the chance to build something meaningful from the ground up, that doesn't come around often. 6 months ago, Lena was just the janitor's daughter. Today, she was rewriting how a company defined human value. She looked out the window, where her father's old Honda sat parked among rows of luxury sedans. And she realized, some journeys aren't about leaving where you started, they're about changing what that place can become. Be accept, she said, her voice steady, all of it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we believe that the human spirit is never truly defeated, only waiting to rise.